Hello, and thank you for pushing play and joining us in our little corner of the online universe. Welcome to State of the Arts, a podcast which is supported by Fís Éireann, Screen Ireland, through the Screen Stakeholders Funding Scheme. I'm Des Doyle, a writer, director, and creative consultant with more than 25 years' experience in the worlds of film and TV production, and I will be your host. As every 2 weeks, we bring you a new episode which will focus on someone who's been extremely successful in their chosen medium, and we'll be about to look at their creative careers and their current and upcoming projects, as well as their take on some of the major news stories currently having an impact in their field of artistry. There will be 6 episodes in season 1 of the pod, and if you would like us to do more than that, then please add us to your playlists. Follow us on our Instagram account at SOTAPod, that's at SOTAPOD, and help us spread the word about the show. And of course, please let us know what you like and what you might like us to change as we go along. Our guest today is the Irish author Catherine Doyle, who lives in the west of Ireland. Her award-winning and internationally best-selling work, which includes middle grade and young adult fiction, has been published in 30 languages. Her #1 Sunday Times and New York Times best-selling YA novel, The Dagger and the Flame, was published in September 2024. The sequel, The Rebel and the Rose, has just recently been published in 2025. She is the co-author of the best-selling YA trilogy Twin Crowns, Cursed Crowns, and Burning Crowns, alongside Catherine Weber, as well as the Blood for Blood Mafia trilogy Vendetta, Inferno, and Mafiosa. Her children's fiction includes the Stormkeeper trilogy and The Miracle on Ebenezer Street. So, Kat, thank you so much for joining us today on State of the Arts. Really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I would love to talk to you a little bit about the story about how you actually got started in writing in the first place, because it was kind of born out of a change of heart, isn't that right?
Yeah, that's right. Well, I've always loved reading and always loved writing kind of in a tangential way, growing up as a teenager, but I never, I think, saw it as a legitimate sort of life plan, I suppose. So I went to college in NUIG and I did my undergrad in psychology, and then I started a master's in health psychology, sort of continuing on in that vein. And I don't know what it was, but the first day of that, the first lecture in my master's in health psychology, I was sitting in the lecture hall and I had this sort of profound regret for the choice that I had made. So I stood up in the middle of the lecture. I kind of just walked out and I walked all the way home and I walked into my house and I just sort of started crying and my mom was there and she said, "What's wrong?" And I said, I don't want to go down the path that I'm on right now and I don't know what to do about it." And so she was incredibly responsive and I did, I'm sure, what perhaps other Irish mothers would do. She called in a local priest who was also one of her best friends, and he sat with me for an hour and he quoted Mary Oliver to me and basically said, "What is it that you want to do with your one wild and precious life?" And I said, "The truth is, like, I want to be a writer, but I think I was 21 and it just felt like too big of a dream. It probably feels like too big of a dream all the time." And he said, "Okay, well, that's what you should pursue." And so I had almost like I had the clarity on what I wanted to do, but I didn't have the confidence to pursue it, and I don't feel like I'd given myself permission to try. So shortly thereafter, my mom came to me and just for context, she's like the most hardworking woman I know. She at this time was a full-time GP. She was working 60, 70-hour weeks. She didn't really have any free time, and her passion was very much, her job being a doctor. She came to me and she said, "I really want to enroll in a local creative writing course at night, but I'm really nervous. I don't want to go by myself because I've never done anything like this before." In hindsight, I don't know how I didn't see through this, but at the time I thought, "Oh, well, what? Do you want me to go with you?" And she said, "Can you come as my kind of support?" And I said, "Fine," because, I would do anything for my mom. So I went along with her, and it was an 8-week short course in the evening times in NUIG in creative writing. And very quickly, she sort of started showing up late. She never did the assignments. She would be eating a sandwich under her desk because she hadn't eaten that day. And she was sort of like she enjoyed it, but she was kind of mentally checked out at the same time. And I remember halfway through thinking, like, how did you become a doctor with this shoddy work ethic? Like, you are putting in 0% of your time and energy here. Meanwhile, I was thriving. I was loving the assignments. I loved reading it out. I loved getting people's feedback. I loved hearing other people's work. I felt like I finally found my purpose and my people. So I was just going gung ho, full steam ahead. And then on the last day, we were all saying goodbye. And another woman in the group came up to me and she said, I just wanted to say I really enjoyed getting to know you. And I really hope that you go on and you try and write a book or write something else. And I'd love to read it one day. And it was like the sun rose in my chest. I actually, I struggle to recall a compliment that profound or that kind of life changing for me because it was the first time I thought, maybe other people want to hear what I have to say. Maybe I will write a book. And I remember I turned to my mom and I said, "Did you hear that?" And she said, "Yeah." And I said, maybe I'm going to try and write a book." And she just gave me this, what would be known in our family as this meddlesome smirk that she does, which is when a plan comes together. And she just smiled and said, "Yeah, I know." And it was sort of like the big reveal to myself that she had tricked me in a very obvious way in hindsight, to basically she led me onto the path of my dreams and she knew that I wouldn't go myself. So she pretended it was for her. And by the time I was sort of 10 steps along the way, she could kind of leave me to it. And so that was for me, I think, the biggest change of course, change of heart. And so the following year, I re enrolled and I did a master's in publishing, immersed myself in the study of books, how they're published, how they're marketed, themes and tropes that do really well. Because I did think to myself, still practically minded, if I try and write a book and it bombs and it's not good and I'm not meant to be a writer, I still want to live and breathe in that world of creativity. And I thought the best thing I can do is strengthen my skills across kind of all elements of book publishing. And so it was during the thesis part of that course when I was writing a thesis on, I think, The Hunger Games and Twilight and why they were so successful, that I started to then write my own book at night. And sort of the two I wrote simultaneously. I don't know how I had any energy to do anything else. I probably didn't. And then by the time I graduated from that master's, I had secured an agent in London, a literary agent.
How much did the MA in publishing inform the choice of writing or what genre to go into or kind of what kind of material you were gonna work with?
It's interesting because they covered so many types of literature. So, there was children's literature, young adult literature, American fiction, adult, all different kinds. It was when I came to do my thesis, you could kind of do it on whatever you wanted, and I wanted to look at the marketing and success of young adult fiction specifically because I was reading a lot of young adult fiction and children's fiction at that time. I loved The Hunger Games, Divergent by Veronica Roth had just come out. Twilight was still doing wonders. All that stuff was just the natural type of books that I was reading, young adult fiction, and so I would say that it was my choice to focus on that area, and then the more that I focused on it, the more I thought maybe it's time for me to have a go and write my own young adult trilogy, which became known as the Blood for Blood trilogy. And the reason that I decided to write that is I remember I was studying the success of Twilight, and in particularly its crossover effect and how it had this whole sub community called Twi Moms. So it wasn't just, it was everyone. It was your granny, it was your 13-year-old babysitter, it was everyone was sort of going feral for this series. And I thought what was interesting about it was, okay, so vampires are, they're not a new invention. What is so compelling about them is they live and move and among us, they're dangerous, they're kind of forbidden, they have their own laws, their own ways of kind of their own hierarchies. So at the time I was also deep and really into mafia movies. I loved Godfather and Goodfellas. And I thought, oh, I want to recreate this sense of danger and sort of forbidden love, but do it with something that I hadn't seen a lot in young adult fiction, which was the mafia and anything to do with the Sicilian mafia, particularly, is so super compelling and successful in like older realms among older generations. And I thought it would be cool to try and do a young adult, I suppose, love story or thriller set in the criminal underworld because that was just an interest of mine. And I thought it would echo in some ways the parallels of vampires or ghosts or whatever other paranormal romances were doing really well at the time. So that was kind of my thinking behind it. And then that sort of became the first book I ever published, Vendetta, basically.
I was genuinely educated to find out that there's a whole subgenre of kind of mafioso romance books out there as well. It's amazing. Can I just talk a little bit about, because a lot of people maybe listening to this, what might be young writers starting out as well. The acquiring the agent is one of the big kind of rites of passage, I think, events that happens for a lot of writers. How did that happen for you? And what were the kind of expectations that you had of what that relationship might be versus how it actually kind of worked out being in the end?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think if looking back now, I would have done it differently. I ended up in the right place, but it was a very haphazard approach for me. What I did was I wrote my first draft. If I could go back and give myself advice, I'd say write your first draft, wait 6 weeks, read it again, see all the mistakes, and edit it and get it in a much better shape. and I sent it to Slush Piles, which is you take the first 3 chapters, you write a little sort of blurb or synopsis of your book and a little introduction about yourself, like, "Ah, hi, I'm Catherine, I'm 21, I this is my first book, this is what it's about." And then I just started sending it to agencies across Ireland and the UK, just hoping that someone would pick it out of the slush pile. So I didn't go to conferences. I didn't make connections with agents. I wasn't chatting to anyone on Twitter. I don't even think I had a Twitter. These are all things that you can do now. I think that better your chances is kind of get face to face time, there's lots of things that you can do. I didn't do any of that. I think I just sort of I probably thought I was gonna fail, so I just wanted to do it as anonymous as possible, and then what happened for me was about 6 weeks in, an intern who was working the slush pile, by the way, is just with the general email of an agency that usually interns go through the manuscripts, slog through, and see if there's anything that they wanna pass on to any of the agents. She found my book in the slush pile, read it, loved it. She was young, she was about 19, I think. She passed it to one of the agents. The agent read it and saw potential, also probably lots of things that I could change. And he called me and he spoke to me about it and he offered representation. And once I had his offer of representation, I went to there were about 3 or 4 other agents who were considering it or hadn't gotten around to it. And one of them, I really wanted Claire Wilson of RCW, who is just like has been an absolute star, and I nudged her and she thank gosh she's competitive. That's why she's so good. She thought, "Give me 1 second." I think she was on her honeymoon or something at the time. And so she read it and she rang me and she didn't offer representation straight away. She said, "I really like the bones of this, but I don't think this really works and I think you could change this." So she actually gave me a lot of editorial feedback, which is a risk, I suppose, because some creatives don't like to be criticized. But little did she know I was, it's a glutton for punishment, so I thought, "Anything you can tell me that will make it better, I wanna do." And so she was like, "Oh, okay." So I said, I love that you're collaborative and you're, an editorial agent." And so I knew straight away she was so funny as well, and, you just click with someone and it's so important. So we started working together, I cleaned up the manuscripts, did everything she wanted me to do, and I'm not kidding, Des, when I tell you I did not have any expectations beyond the getting of the agent. I never, ever thought about what comes next. I never even thought about the part where they send it to publishers. For me, getting the agent felt like the end of the sprint. And then she said, "Okay, I'm gonna send it to publishers." And I just had this I thought, "What? How okay," I had to sort of be like, "All right, there's another step after this. This is the money-making step, the actual step." Because people spend so long concentrating on the agent, I suppose you don't wanna think too far ahead. And so she sent it out to publishers and we went on submission. And, I remember in a full circle moment, the first person to connect with the manuscript was a man called Barry Cunningham, who had founded Chicken House Publishing. And Barry is known for discovering Harry Potter when he was at Bloomsbury. He's the one who took it home to his daughter and decided to give J.K. Rowling, I think, £2,000 for the first 3 manuscripts and said, "Look, don't quit your day job. We'll see how it goes." So he had kind of built his reputation on the back of being the man who brought Harry Potter to the masses. And then he had opened his own publishing house. And I knew about him because I had just written about him in my thesis. It's unusual that you would know the names of publishers, they wouldn't be front and center. But when my agent emailed me and said Barry really likes this, I thought, "Oh my God, it's like a celebrity. I just wrote about Barry. I just wrote about the all, it just felt like kismet or something. So, we ended up going with him, and I remember saying to Claire when she rang me, "Oh my gosh." She said, he's offered you money." And I thought, "I would pay him to publish me." And she said, "Don't ever, ever say that. Don't do anything. Don't speak about money ever. Let me do that." And I said, "Okay, okay, okay." I just felt so lucky, and I felt like they were just taking this huge chance on me and the business side of it. And never, it's even now, like, I'm so bad at it. I could never negotiate for myself. So she did all of that, and we went to lunch in London, and I met the publishers, and it was just magical. And then from there, it became real. It became the publishing journey. But certainly that step from agent to publisher was, and also it's horrendous. Like, being on submission to agents is one thing, but when you're on submission to publishers, it, like, eats away at you. I think it was, like, the longest it was probably only, like, 4 weeks, but it was, like, the longest 4 weeks of my life. Like, you're just on tenterhooks the entire time. So, yeah, that was how it all began.
Maybe something else that younger writers and new writers might be familiar with is once you do actually get picked up by a publisher, that's the beginning of a whole new raft of work kind of going on as well, right?
Yeah, so then especially in the current climate, and it was coming through, then it's about how are we going to market you? What about you personally is interesting that will set you apart from the plethora of other books that are coming out? What's unique about your book? What's unique about you? I think so much in this day and age of publishing is really you can't just hold the book and hide behind it. You have to almost also, especially I think in young adult fiction, which can be a good thing or a bad thing because a lot of authors really just like to write and they don't like to be public facing and going to schools or going into festivals and sit on a stage and talk to 400, 500 people. That's not natural, I think, for most people, particularly creatives who typically kind of work in their pajamas at midnight, like I did. So the next step then is okay, you have to write and edit the book. That's a huge part of it, obviously. But then there's all the other stuff like where does it sit on the shelves? What's the cover going to look like? You don't typically feed into those conversations. You might hate your cover. I certainly hated my cover. I found it really cheesy, but it's like, well, this is what works on the market. And so you have to kind of give up control of a lot of things very early on. And then you have to sort of find your own USP, what you would talk about in an interview, and what about you ties in with, the book. That's difficult if you write about the Sicilian mafia and someone says, "Okay, what's the angle?" Like, I don't know. I'm obviously, not in the mafia. So all these kind of things, there are lots and lots of conversation that go beyond just the creative. And it really is a machine. And you are at the mercy of luck, of timing, and of the buyers at Waterstones and Easton's and Dupre and all these places, things that you can't control. So for me at that time, the one thing that I could really drill down on was just making this book as absolutely as brilliant as it could be and sort of trying to make the right connections with fellow authors, with early readers, and trying to make a bit of buzz happen. But a lot of that, unless you're like a celeb author, David Williams or whatever, is out of your hands.
Especially if you're a celeb author who's actually writing their own book and then not having a ghost written for them.
What a novel concept.
What was it like then when Vendetta actually did get published? It's on a bookshelf. You can walk into a bookstore and physically see it and physically hold a copy.
Yeah, it was wild because the other thing that I didn't realize is so you sign your publishing contract. Typically, from the day you sign your contract, you're looking at 18 months to publication at a minimum. So it's a lot of anticipation and a lot of stuff behind the scenes. It finally rolls around. We had this huge launch in Easton's O'Connell Street. I invited all of my friends and family, and it's like, big shindig, and it was a huge party, really, really exciting. And then it's like, it was, I suppose, a little bit, it was cool, but then it was almost anticlimactic because you know, then your book is on shelves and it's great, but people everyone moves on with their lives. You're working on book 2. And so I think for me, a lot of the excitement or then a lot of the nice things would happen online. I would get emails from readers, a lot of teenagers, or teenage girls in particular. And that would be kind of the space where I would interact with readers and see how the book was doing. And then I never, to this day, I never look for my books in bookshops. I don't know why I just would never go into a bookshop and see if my book was on the shelves. But my dad, it's his favorite thing to do, and he will do it in any country he's in. So he was in Spain like 2 weeks ago, and he sent me a photo of himself with one of my books in Spanish. He never buys them. I said, "This must be so annoying for booksellers." Goes in, asks, "Do they have it?" Takes a picture, tells them about me, and then leaves. So, it's really he would send me photos and stuff. So that was really exciting. But yeah, it's funny, and then you just get back for me, I just got back to work and did the next one and the next one and the next one and the next one and just didn't want it to end, just wanted to make a success of this career, and unfortunately, you're only as kind of good as your last book in a way, so for me, it was just foot on the gas, and it's been there ever since, really.
I'm presuming that when you started, you knew that the first couple of books were going to be a trilogy,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, that's right.
How much outlining did you do in advance of that? Did you like I'm curious because I was listening to Richard Osman there the other day talking now they're not a continuing series, but they're continuing characters. And he was saying he literally makes it up as he goes along. And I find that very almost impossible to process.
And these are like thrillers, aren't they? That's hilarious.
Yeah.
I don't know how people do it with thrillers because you need to have. Anyway, but yeah, so the first book was written. That's another example of something I didn't think about. They said, "Oh, is it a trilogy?" And I said, "Yes," but I definitely wasn't. I was just thinking, "This is one book. We sell this book." So what I gave them was the first book in its entirety, and then just a quick synopsis of book 2 and 3, which I would refer to now as vibes of what's gonna happen. But in terms of the actual meat of the plot, I will even now, I've written several trilogies, rarely, if ever, go into any real depth on book 2 or book 3 until book 1 is completely edited because so much can change. For me, the only thing set in stone is the characterizations, the characters that appear in book 1 of a trilogy in particular. And then the rest is just, and here's kind of vaguely what'll happen in book 2, and here's the vibes of book 3. And typically that does tend to be enough. I do think if I was writing thrillers or murder mysteries, I would have to plan it out. But, a lot of what I write is romance. So, romance with the in fantasy worlds or whatever, or a bit of danger. So you can be looser with it, I think. There's lots of ways you can go. There's lots of avenues. So I don't try to box myself in by book 1 because I know that it'll be evolving as I'm writing it.
I suppose the timelines maybe don't allow for it, but generally speaking, because you're a number of books in, you're remarkable. Considering the first book was published in 2015, you've since published 13
Yeah.
books. There's another 2 coming in the first quarter of 2026,
Yeah.
which is a pretty prolific rate to be writing at. But do you find yourself ever influenced by audience reaction to books, steering you in different directions in terms of like where you might be going from book to book?
It's a good question. Typically, what I found, I don't go on Goodreads, for example. I don't read reviews, but I will for the first couple of weeks when a book comes out, if it's part of a trilogy. So I get a sense of anything that I can be tweaking for book 2 in terms of mainly criticism. Like if something's not working, I like to know that. What's good is in most aspects of what I write when I write series or trilogies is the reader often reacts as I'm hoping that they will. They're warming to the right characters, they're suspicious of other characters, they're rooting for, let's say, 2 characters who hate each other, but I'm eventually going to make marry or whatever. They're reacting in the way that I'm hoping, which means the emotional and the subtler beats are coming across. And the only time when we've had I write there's a trilogy I write with my sister-in-law called Twin Crowns, which is kind of on the younger YA side for like 11, 12 and up, and it's about a princess and a witch who are twins separated at birth. They switch places and havoc ensues. And in that trilogy, one of the sisters is in a love triangle, and she ends up with, in the end, with one side of the love triangle, and the other side is left to his own devices. And that really annoyed a lot of people, like a lot of people. They were like, "But what about him?" So in answer to that, I went and wrote a standalone where he gets his own happy ending in his own romance, just to really round out everybody's happy endings, basically in that scenario. But usually, I don't do too much tweaking based on reader feedback. I wouldn't take, like, ideas and use them typically, but if they're like, "I hate this character," I might kill that character off or something.
Well, that's fair enough, I guess, if an audience is reacting negatively to somebody to that extent.
I would try and not, and I don't want people to be annoyed or frustrated either, so but usually they're on the same page as me.
Well, the books seem pretty popular and seem to be doing pretty well at the moment, so you must be doing something right in that regards. Just you mentioned the books there that you co-wrote with your sister-in-law, right? Catherine. I'm wondering the division of labor on those books because it seems to be we're alternating chapters in terms of points of view as we go through the books with the characters, which is then something you follow through on in the City of Fantome books as well.
That's right, yeah.
And I'm just wondering, did you find that process so interesting in terms of how you could tell a story that you wanted to replicate that then as an approach in the Phantom books as well?
Yeah, I think it came about naturally, obviously, with Twin Crowns because we had 2 twins. One is a sarcastic witch, one is an idealistic princess. You know, my sister-in-law is the bubbliest, Californiest, loveliest sunshine person ever. I'm Irish, so I said, "I will do the cynical, sarcastic witch, and she will do the idealistic." So that was an easy division of the point of views, the dual point POV. When I came to writing, the City of Fantome trilogy, which is skews older and darker, I was just going to write it from Seraphine's point of view. Seraphine is the runaway we meet at the start of chapter 1, and she's running from the price on her head because, and she's searching for sanctuary with the cloaks, who are the local thieves of the city, because she's being chased by a dagger, who are the local assassins, basically. And so it was going to be this cat and mouse, enemies to lovers, push and pull between Seraphine and Ransom, a cloak and a dagger, who basically find themselves at odds with each other and eventually fall for each other. Spoiler alert. But as I was writing Seraphine, and she was an interesting character because she's innocent, she's quite vulnerable. Her mother has passed away. She's left alone in the world with her dog. She's just looking for a foothold in the city, looking to kind of save her own life and maybe kind of figure herself out. And I would write Ransom through her eyes, but he was just coming forward as this stalker shadow type who would just appear and try and kill her at random times. And there wasn't enough depth to him. And I didn't feel like the story or the sexual tension even or their enmity was singing off the page at all. So I started writing a couple of chapters from his point of view early on. And I just loved his character. I thought he was so rich and interesting because he's this 19-year-old heir to the Order of Assassins. And it immediately throws up questions like, how did that happen? I got to go into his backstory as a boy, as an orphan, as a runaway, and how he kind of became so hardened to the world, and kind of how many of his hopes and dreams have remained after 10 years of this terrible life where he lives in the catacombs as, essentially a killer for hire. And the more I wrote from Ransom's point of view, the more I realized, okay, this has to be both sides. We need both of their backstories, both of their kind of emotional spectrums, so we understand, one, why they try and kill each other at the start, and two, why they slowly warm to each other. So that just felt, the second I started writing his point of view, it felt like the obvious and natural choice to correctly tell the story.
I just finished reading The Rebel and the Rouse actually, and I really enjoyed it. I'm obviously not maybe the target demographic for the book, but did really enjoy it. Have you already finished the third in the series? Is that done?
Yeah, so it's actually due at the end of this week. Would you believe? So yeah, it is done. Yeah, and that'll be the end of the trilogy.
Okay. Obviously, you probably can't divulge the title here and now, but I'm wondering, does it include the words "and the"?
It does, yeah. If I good guess, Des. Yeah, it does follow the same sequence, and it's just sort of like the epic culmination of the whole trilogy, basically. So it's high stakes.
One of the interesting things about your career as well is you actually moved into writing middle grade books at quite an early stage as well. And I'm wondering, was there any concern or pushback from rep or publishers at the time? Because in the early stages of an author's career, generally, if you've had some success in one field, they want you to kind of double down and kind of plow that furrow a bit longer. Did you find anything like that when you were trying to move over?
Well, I had like the opposite experience. So I wrote the Blood for Blood trilogy, and that did well. It did fine. And then I wrote another standalone book in that genre, not mafia, but it was a young adult sort of love story type thing, and it didn't sell. So, I thought, "Uh-oh, what am I gonna do now?" And actually, I actually at that point was thinking, "Okay, maybe all I had in me were these 3 books, and maybe there won't be any more books." I wasn't feeling inspired, I was feeling rejected and kind of and that's another fallacy. I think people think once you have one book published, everything you write will be published. I've been rejected at every stage of my career for various projects. This was the first rejection since getting an agent, and I really took it badly because I thought, "Oh, it's like the world is rejecting my stories." That's how I took it, instead of just this one story isn't working. So I took some time off, and my at that time I was in Galway, and my grandparents, my maternal grandparents, both hail from Arranmore Island, the Donegal Arranmore Island off the coast. And they were in Galway, they were in a nursing home, and my grandfather was in the early stages or the middle stages of Alzheimer's, and he was kind of losing his grip on himself. He was forgetting who we were. He was really struggling. And so I was doing a lot of help caring for them at that time, helping my mother. And coincidentally, at that time, the school from Arranmore wrote to me and said, "Will you come up and teach our students for a week? Do some creative writing exercises with them." And I went because I wanted to reconnect with the island that had sort of raised my grandparents and the one they used to speak of so warmly. I hadn't been back in years and years and years, and I thought of it more as a pilgrimage that my mom and I would do together. So we went, and we stayed in a cousin's house on the island of Arranmore. And as we were crossing on the ferry, there were these dolphins. It was like a blustery day, and the island sort of was bubbling up out of the sea. I had this incredibly deep sense of home come over me, the sense of belonging I've never felt before, as though like there was something in my DNA that recognized the island. It was calling out to me. And so I went and I taught in the school, and I met the kids, and they were all brilliant, and we had a great week. And while I was there, we would get calls from cousins all over the island saying, "Oh, you're Charlie and Mamie's granddaughter. Come and have tea." So we were having tea in all of these houses, and we were down at the pub having Guinness. And and I was related to loads, like most of these people, and they would start sharing stories about my grandfather and my grandmother as children, and all these. And he was a sea captain. They would share stories of his brave, daring adventures and all the lifeboat men that came before him, how his father did this daring lifeboat rescue in 1941. And and I suppose the longer I spent there, the more I realized that on Aaron Moore, people don't die. There are people who have been gone for hundreds of years that are remembered as though they still live down the road. And it was this incredible experience. I thought, my grandfather is at home in Ireland or in Galway losing his memories. And on Aaron Moore, every single person here remembers him from when he was a child. And they're telling stories about him and his brave sea rescues. And they're telling stories about his grandparents and their grandparents. And it was such a powerful, magical experience. I thought, I want to write a book about this. And the voice that came to me was an 11-year-old boy who was unsure of himself, who goes to stay on this island for the first time, Aaron Moore. And his grandfather there is losing his memories, like my grandfather in real life was. But the grandfather on the island had lived in a cottage full of candles, and they all smell and look completely different. And he was storing his memories in the candles. So every time he needed to remember something, he'd burn a candle, and the island would kind of change like the pages in a sketch pad, and you would kind of go back in time and be part of the memory and see it for yourself for the first time. So that's how Fionn discovered his own history. And so that was the first kernel of the idea. And it came to me as we were leaving on the ferry. I just felt so inspired, and I wrote, I think for 3 days, I wrote about 10,000 words, just the first vibe of the story. I sent it to my agent and I said, "This is totally weird. It's about like an old man who lives in a house full of candles that holds his memories, and like his grandson who's lost his father and is sort of unmoored." And I was kind of trying to explain to her, and I said, "I don't know if it's any good. It might be too personal to me. It might be too much about me try to save my grandfather's memory in a book. I don't know if it's good, but I had to write it down." So she read it and she immediately connected with it. And I think she sold it on a partial. So it was only 10,000 words. It went out so quickly and then it sold in like 25 countries. And it turns out like what I thought was a super personal experience for me was this kind of universal experience and struggle that was, across the world. And so that book that I didn't mean to write at a genre that I didn't even read much of anymore. And, 11-year-old boy, why was I writing? I don't know. It just, that was his voice. It was the most natural thing I could do. And it was the book I think that really, The Stormkeeper's Island is what it became. And it completely jump started my career and took it to another level entirely that I never even brushed against with the Blood for Blood trilogy. This just went kind of global in a big way. And I traveled extensively for it, across Europe and the UAE and America. And at its core, it's really the story of like just a kid and his grandfather who's losing his memories. And that was my experience, for that trilogy that I wrote it. And the week before the third book came out, I lost my grandfather. But I feel now, looking back, that he is encapsulated in those pages and kind of remembered forever because of the way that story came to me.
It almost feels like the universe is kind of directing you to kind of tell this
100%.
story at this time, like.
I had to, it was like pouring out of me. I mean, I've never had that experience since, I wish. It was like it was like a manic energy that I had to just get out of me. And so it wasn't consciously like I'm going to pivot to a different genre. It was just like I need to just tell this story as it's coming to me. And it just so happened that that just caught fire, and that kind of is why I made that pivot. It wasn't a conscious decision at all, really.
That was the first one of your books that I bought for my niece, Grace, and she absolutely loved it. And one of the things she loved about it was one, it was a story about a place in Ireland focused around Irish kids, but also incorporating some elements of Irish mythology, which is something you've done in a number of different books. What is the interest or the impetus there for trying to build new stories around kind of classic elements of Irish mythology?
Well, I think because, growing up, what did the most successful books for children were, Harry Potter, obviously, The Northern Lights by Philip Pullman, Rick Riordan's Percy Jackson, and these were all, all these magical stories from different cultures. And I felt very strongly that Ireland has this really, really rich tapestry of myths and legends. And we know them all. Like, the kids in Ireland know those myths and legends. Tierna know we grow up with them in our blood. But there was nothing that I felt was was kind of global, with the exception of, I will say, Uncalled for an Artemis Fowl. That was my favorite book growing up because it was Irish. It was an Irish kid, and I thought, oh, we can have magic too. We can have adventures. We can capture fairies or whatever, and be super villains. And that was such an important book for me growing up that I knew that I wanted my story, especially as it grew into a trilogy, to be heavily influenced by Irish mythology, Irish magic, Irish legends, because I think as a country we are absolutely blessed with that kind of richness, and it just lends itself really because it was set in Iron Moor. It lends itself to the kind of magic system. So I brought back a few of the old gods, and then as I wrote on past the Stormkeeper's Island, the Lost Girl King is a standalone I did about siblings who tumble into Tír na Og. I always really wanted to do a modern sort of take on Tír na Og and what it would be like if a modern kid fell in there and was like, oh my God. So I think it was just naturally part of the fabric of who I am as a reader and as a kid in Ireland that I wanted to bring it out as a writer. I felt to me like if I'm going to look at gods and monsters and myth, I'm just going to dip into my own culture because that's what I want to help spread. And it's funny, I was touring randomly, like I was on a tour of America and I ended up in Arizona. Is that where Breaking Bad is? Wherever Breaking Bad was filmed was where I was. No, New Mexico, sorry.
New
New
Mexico,
Mexico.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Because I was right by the where they filmed it, which was cool for me, but irrelevant to the children because they didn't know what it was. But they were obsessed with the Stormkeeper's Island because of the sea. The sea is such almost like a character of its own, which being Irish is not that groundbreaking because the sea is kind of everywhere, which is wonderful. And they were all about like the desert more so and sort of like the cities. And I suppose the idea of the sea being so close to in the book and so close to me as a person who lives in Ireland was so magical to them. So it was really interesting to see the things that children across the world connect with. Like I was in Sharjah in the UAE. Similarly, there it's a desert place, a desert filled kind of city, and they just couldn't get over it. They wanted to know what the sea smells like, what it tastes like. I said, you're not supposed to, I don't know, salt, I guess. But it was interesting that where they found magic and Morrigan and Dagda, they had never heard of these entities before, or even Tír na Og. What's Tír na Og? It's really cool getting to reintroduce those elements to children that aren't Irish and getting their reaction.
As someone who works in film and television, I think it's fantastic what you're doing because one of the like trying to build projects around Irish mythology is something that a lot of people here are very interested in doing. One of the challenges with it is it doesn't really have an international footprint. So
Yes,
audiences around the world are just unfamiliar with these legends and characters and stuff. So introducing children to these characters and potentially having them grow up with recognition of them is
yeah,
fantastic work.
yeah.
So screen producers are should be paying you some money or something. They'll kill me for saying that. I'm curious as well, just about as we spoke there before. There's a lot of books in a short period of time. What is your kind of writing process? Do you write quickly generally?
Yes, I draft quickly, and I need to draft quickly because I'm a little bit impulsive. So if I get an idea, I get stressed out until it's drafted because I don't know how to explain it. I'm like, I need to get it all written, and then I have to go back and rewrite it because I'm just afraid that I'll lose the bones of it. So typically, yeah, for a book, let's say a higher end book. So for middle grade, like my middle grade would be maybe 50,000 words average, anywhere from 40 to 70. That would take me about 3 months of drafting, which is very quick. And then for a book that's 100,000 words, about 4 months of just every day as many words as I can get on the page. And then I have to completely sort of scalp it and redo it and change it around. But for me, I need to get the idea down first and quickly. And I don't know why. And I kind of wish I wasn't like that because I feel like I'm in a race, but but I'm not. But I like to just, yeah, and I like to do typically 2 books a year if I can.
2 books a year. Do you have any superstitions around the writing process? Is there, you know, a little ritual that you go through every time before you start or finish or
I used to have a ritual where I'm not a morning person at all. So I would just think my brain doesn't come on online till about 2 or 3. So I would write from about 6 p.m. to midnight. And I liked writing when it got dark and when it was quiet and I felt like I could really tap into my creativity. And then I had a baby. And now I write in the the sort of 45 minutes when he sleeps in the morning, and I write when he closes his eyes, I'm like at my computer. So I've had to become completely way more efficient and write totally differently than I did before because I just don't have the luxury of brain power after 6 p.m. and I don't have the luxury of brain space when I want it at specific times. And that's been for me a new challenge, getting the words out in smaller bursts and making sure that they're good.
Have you ever had an issue with block, writer's block at all?
Yeah, of course. There'll be things I'll come to and or you get to the middle of your book and you're like, this is the worst thing I've ever read in my life, or what happens next, or this doesn't make sense. And then I will just not, I won't write for a week and I'll watch loads of movies, or I'll watch a really good TV show, or I'll go for walks and listen to music. I find for me, if I get creatively inspired in another medium by someone else's work, it can kind of re-inspire me to re-engage with my own work. And that's always been a kind of a tried and true method for me, is especially like with movies and TV shows. Like I love that medium. So for me, it's really easy to just be like, okay, I'm just gonna rest my brain and kind of refill the well, and it does typically work so far.
How much work do you do in advance of the writing in terms of, like, say, for the fantasy novels, the world building aspects of it, designing the magic systems, religions, and so forth? Like, how in depth do you kind of go with that before the writing, or is it an evolving process through the writing?
No, I definitely needed to percolate for about a month or two. Typically, I'll have an idea for a book when I'm writing, when I'm working on another book or editing another book. So it will almost be percolating in the back of my mind, and then I'll have a notes app on my phone, and every time an idea comes to me, I'll write it down, write it down, write it down. And then when it comes to sitting down to plan it, I will paste in the notes app, and it will just be, I don't know, 4,000 words of random thoughts. And then I spend about a week or two organizing all of that and getting a sense of the world. With me in fantasy, I always like the world to feel like its own character. So that really has to be there for me from the start. And then I make a big mood board of about 15 images of artwork or things that give me the right vibe of place, just so I can mentally kind of picture it as I write it. And then I do some character work, and then I start writing. So I do like to have a really strong sense of the world. The characters can evolve easier once they're on page, through dialogue and interactions and stuff like that. But I think, yeah, I like to have a good sense of place to ground everything in starting out.
I get a very French vibe from everything in relation to City of Fantome and place names and stuff.
Yeah.
Was France a big kind of visual inspiration for?
Yeah, so with the City of Fantome, I wanted it to feel fresh but familiar, so it's kind of a little bit more accessible to the reader. So Fantome it's basically like, I think about like a kind of a 19th century fantastical version of Paris. So you have the beautiful architecture, the flickering lamplight, the secret catacombs, and then it's just infused with sort of this. It's kind of like, it's not Catholic at all, but it's system of worshiping the saints, and then there's magic, sort of the old dust of magic, sort of moving through the underworld of Fantôme, which is kind of small magic. It's kind of a well, it's a powder, it's a substance essentially. And so that kind of came from my love of France. And I love Paris in particular. And I've been going to France ever since I was, a child. My parents would go there kind of once or twice a year for probably about 15 years. And when we were there, they would drag me and my brothers to every church and every cathedral. And we would be, going up Montserrat. We would be everywhere, seeing all the Madonnas, kissing the statue. So really, I'm making them sound like loonies. They're just lovely, normal people, but they were really interested, one, in Catholicism and Catholic architecture. And so, and there's something kind of magical about a huge cathedral like Notre Dame. I don't know if you've probably been,
Yeah,
but,
no, it's
you know,
amazing, yeah.
the magic of somewhere like Notre Dame, or like these places that are up mountains or on islands, that was all really interesting to me as in terms of a setting. And also, being Irish, you grow up and you lose something, you say, oh, we'll say a prayer to St. Anthony. Or there's somebody that you know in your class who's a pain in the ass, and you say, oh, well, he's a case for St. Jude of lost causes. I love the idea that the saints were like, in charge of certain kinds of prayers and kinds of people. So I thought, I want to create a world where there are, a finite like 12 saints, and they have their own areas that they rule over, and you pray to a saint based on what you need from them. It just kind of like almost like they're the superheroes, from the heavens. So that was kind of the idea behind the religious framework of it. And then of course the evolution in the City of Fantome is, you know, they're taught their whole lives that the saints are gone and they're just these relics that are prayed to for good luck or whatever. And then as the trilogy progresses, the magic becomes bigger, and we get the second coming of the saints, and new people are being kind of endowed with these old powers. And it's the question of what would that look like, you know, if an ordinary person suddenly has this sort of sway or power over something, and would it corrupt them, you know?
You were talking a bit earlier on about social media, and obviously you're very active on social media. And I think, is it fair to say that book talk especially has played a huge part in blowing up both the Twin Crowns books and the City of Fantome books? There seems to be quite a devout fan base across both those books at this point who are quite vocal on there. So firstly, just in terms of social media aspect, do you actually enjoy it? Because I know for some people in my line of business, it's actually made contractual to do it, and they don't enjoy a lot of it. But how important is it as well in this day and age, like to try and be like, self-promoting and marketing your own work?
I don't naturally enjoy it. You know, I wouldn't say I'm even particularly good at it. I don't, you know, it's not my like with TikTok. I don't really make TikToks, but I also don't think it's necessary. A book's success is not predicated on how active the author is on Book Talk. What you really need for success is for the book talkers to take it into their hearts and their homes and kind of become the vanguards of the series. I think when we saw real success is Katie and I, my sister-in-law, we write Twin Crowns, the Twin Crowns trilogy. Coming out of COVID, when lockdowns were being lifted, we launched the first book. And this is a younger sort of fantasy that's a little bit more Princess Bride adjacent thematically. So it's not dark. It's kind of bubbly and fun and comedic, and that's what people were crying out for because of the state of the world in lockdown. Nobody wanted to go too dense or too dark with their fantasy. So that caught on naturally because we were on trend. But also when we launched it, we threw this huge ball and we invited people to come dressed in their suits and their ball gowns and their crowns and their swords, essentially like adults playing dress up. And what we have learned is you can grow up, but you never grow out of the opportunity to, you know, be whatever, like a prince or a knight or a princess or a queen or whatever you want to be. So we would throw these balls and we did them in France and the Netherlands. We would travel around and our publishers would kind of well, they would throw the ball, we would show up and host. And I think that kind of gained for us a really meaningful visual footprint online. So people were looking on Instagram and TikTok, being, "What is this ball? And what's this book? And who are these authors?" And from there, it kind of what rose was this strong sense of sisterhood in real life. All these people who would come and connect and make friendships at these events, and then those friendships would spill over offline, and they would make their own content about Twin Crowns specifically, and they would make their own art. And the more visual content is, I think the more it pulls you into a book or a series, it piques your interest. And that was happening organically for us once we sort of launched it in a very big visual way. And then we would, as authors, it's nice to respond and to help promote or boost this kind of content. But, you know, Katie and I, we weren't the ones making the art necessarily. We would commission a few pieces here and there, but we weren't the ones cosplaying because I think that's different and it's hard to do that as an author. And I don't think it's as organic because it's like, it's not a real draw of the series. It's just you ruthlessly trying to self-promote. I don't think it works. So that took off and that was and so that just became its own special thing. And then from there, obviously, writing The Dagger and the Flame, I was already known through the Twin Crowns, so you have some people just came with me and gravitated, and now they're doing artwork and videos for the City of Fantome, and that's been really great. But I don't think I'm personally skilled. I'm not skilled at book talk at all. I think it's hilarious and I love it, but I'm not good at it, and that's fine. That's not one of my strengths. So it's not something I'm very good at, but I try to be active and responsive. I think it's important to be responsive to people's efforts, especially if they're done for the love of your books.
Yeah, no, the whole concept of building community around books and characters, I think, is absolutely the way to be doing things at the moment. I'm curious as well, just in relation to potential film and TV adaptations of work. There's a mention in the acknowledgements at the end of Rebel in the Rose where you're talking about CAA and some other people potentially trying to look at getting these online. Obviously, for Romantasy is maybe the biggest subgenre that's out there at the moment in terms of popularity. And there's a number of books that I know Fourth Wing is being adapted by Amazon at the moment and stuff.
Right. Yeah.
Is there something in the works there, or is that an area particularly that you would be interested in going down the road with?
Yeah. City of Fantome is under contract with a big, uh it's currently just we've just signed the contract with a big, I don't even big company who want to do something with it. I don't think I can talk about it, but it's you know yourself though, like Des, I've had books under contracts. Pretty much all of them have been under contract at some stage. So it's really hard to get overexcited before there's a script, before there's any sort of real meaningful movement. But I will say it is in contract with a really big company who seem enthusiastic about it and have a vision for it. So I would love to see that come to fruition. But you just never know. Like you never know.
How involved would you like to be with that if it did go forward? Like, would you want to be writing on it?
Yeah, I think so. I think because I write quite filmmaker visually anyways, I would definitely like to be attached to the script in some way, and I think that would be I think, it's not a deal breaker for me, it never is in any of my contracts, but if they want me on board in that capacity, I'm always happy to say yes, you know?
Well, it's always a good sign that the interest is there, at least to start off with. I'm curious as well, just you've worked with a number of different publishers across the different book series that you're doing. Are there major differences between how each kind of publisher operates in relation to working with you as an author? Or is it just about this is a different editor and this is a slightly different marketing schedule? Or
I would say less about publisher to publisher, genre to genre would be very different. So, with YA, you'd want to be doing more festivals, more traveling, more glitzy launches, all of that stuff, more online stuff. Then with the younger, what I didn't like about middle grade, the younger like Stormkeeper age, is school tours. So I would typically go to England, for example, and visit maybe 11 schools in 5 days and give a PowerPoint talk about my book and a lot of hand selling. You might sell 50 books in a day, you might sell 100, you might sell 10. That's very much the model, I think, for middle grade fiction. Not as much in Ireland, but certainly in the UK, I've done huge, like loads and loads of school tours. For me, I don't like it's not my wheelhouse. I always lose my voice. I find it very exhausting. My father is a teacher his whole career, and I don't know how primary school teachers. He's a secondary school teacher, and I 4 of my best friends are primary school teachers. I don't know how they do that every day because I lose my voice after like day one. I'm on like the soothers and stuff. So that is the primary mode of marketing because that's where the kids are. They're in school. Whereas, teenagers are online. So it's a kind of easier when you write for teenage because you're not going to find them in the malls, really. You're going to find them on Book Talk. You're going to find them on Instagram. So I prefer that as a way to kind of get the book out there. But a publisher to publisher, obviously there are some publishers who will put more into marketing my books. Um, have bigger budgets, are more bolshy, more punchy, and then some publishers who are more conservative. But that's probably just I don't know if that would be that's just case to case.
when we started, you were talking about your road to becoming an author, and there was obviously a huge amount of grift. Not grift, sorry, that's a terrible choice of word. I mean,
Oh, it is
hard
grift, actually.
work.
I think it's a good
But a lot of hard work and efforts and something of a plan, a kind of a design to what you were doing with doing the MA and publishing and stuff in advance. I'm just curious what your take is. One of the bigger stories I've been looking at in the world of publishing recently is in relation to fan fiction.
Oh, yeah.
And in just recent times, I don't know if you're familiar with the author Sen Lin Yu. She made a name for herself writing, which I wasn't even aware existed, but Hermione fan fiction, which is the Draco Hermione shippers. And one of those stories that she wrote, which is called Manacle, ended up with being downloaded more than 20 million times. Off the back of this, she reconstituted that fan fiction into a novel called Alchemized, which is a dark romantasy, which led to a bidding war, and the rights to the book were bought for $3 million for film. And it then ended up selling. Del Rey bought the book itself, and it sold 145,000 copies in the US in its first week. Now, obviously, this is not the first fan fiction success story that we've seen with E.L. James with 50 Shades and stuff. But does that grind at all a little bit, considering not just for yourself, but for other authors who've kind of done maybe a harder road, a more traditional road to go to, that you can kind of leverage a fan base that you've kind of built off the work of others into turning that into a success for yourself?
Yeah, it's a tough one. I haven't read Alchemized, and I haven't read it before it became Alchemized. I haven't read Manacled. I am aware of the story. So it's hard to know if I read Alchemized going in blind, if it would stand on its own 2 feet, as I imagine it would if it sold those numbers, as its own story, and if it would have needed the crutch, let's say, of the Hermione thing to begin as manacled. It's tricky. It's tricky because I think it's not dissimilar from the way some authors come up through book talk, and they have this huge following, and then they switch and they decide to start writing their books, and they'll take tropes that are from other books and they'll sell in their millions. And I suppose it's easy as an author who came up traditionally to be annoyed about that. And I won't speak for J.K. Rowling. I'm sure she'd have her own thoughts on what how she feels about Manacle turning into Alchemized. If it happened with one of my books, it probably would be frustrating. Um, it probably would be frustrating, but I look in it I take a kind of a broad approach of, like, a rising tide lifts all boats. So anytime you tell me, "Oh, this YA or this adult fantasy book came out and it sold 200,000 copies," I'm thinking, "Good, that's 200,000 people reading." You know, that's the 200,000 people who will read that and think, "What's similar to this? I like this romance," or "I like this fantasy." So in that sense, I think I try not to begrudge huge successes like that. The fan fiction one, like you said, E.L. James is a good example of that. I don't know how much pushback she got when she made her book. What she did was clever, I think, because she looked at Twilight, and what Twilight was missing, intentionally, was all that sex. So what she did was she added a very potent ingredient and sort of turned it all on its head and made it, I think, quite different, and that's why that worked so well for her. Um, it's tricky. It's tricky. It's hard to know without someone doing it to my book. It probably would annoy me. Yeah, it probably would annoy me, but it happens.
I'm just wondering as well, in terms of projects going forward, do you have an actual kind of a slate of books in front of you right now? Like, if the final book in City and Fantome is almost finished, how many other books are you currently working on simultaneously at this point in time?
Yeah, so I'm just doing it's the first draft, so I'll be for the next 6 months, editing and getting that up to snuff, and then the books that are out next year, so King of Beasts, which is out in January, and Scare out in March, both written and edited and proofread from last year, so they're written. Scare 2 is also written, so, right now I'm just when I'm writing this book, and then I'll have a breather to think about if I wanna write something completely new, but typically yeah, any book that's coming out next year, with the exception of Phantom 3, is already written and proofread and gone to final stages and has its cover ready to go. So that's just the nature, I think, really of publishing is that it's in the bag for about a year before it comes out.
Are you pitching anything beyond that to other publishers at the moment, or
No, not yet, but I'm never too far away from a new pitch. So who knows what'll happen when I'm idle and when I get this draft in. What it really just depends on what ideas come to you and what the time that I have to write it down and see if it kind of, it's a goer or not.
okay, a couple of quick questions just to finish up with. Do you have a favorite book of your own that you've written?
Oh, yes, probably my favorite book. It's probably the second Stormkeeper's Island, The Lost Tide Warriors. That whole trilogy is just so personal to me. It just transcends entertainment and creativity because it's so much of my heart and my family is in the book. So probably that whole trilogy and the second book in particular.
Are there 3 key pieces of advice you might give to a young writer starting out at this point in time?
Yes, read, 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 read. I mean, read as much as you can, and if you and particularly in the genre that you want to write in, so you are utterly familiar with everything that's out there. And then as you're reading, like, pay attention to what speaks to you, what scenes make your heart quicken or lose your breath or hold your breath, and try and figure out why that is and how you might create it in your own work. And then also when you start writing that draft, when you finally sit down and start writing, make yourself finish even if you get halfway through and you think, "This is actually very bad." Just try and get to the end point because the first draft isn't supposed to be good. It's just the bones. It's the bones. When you go back over it, rewrite it, edit it, that's when it comes to life. So many young writers will write to 20,000, 25,000 words and then give up, and I always think that's a shame because if you're doing anything right, you're supposed to question your whole existence when you get to 25,000 words and wonder if you've wasted your time. That is the creative process for most people. So just kind of to keep going. And then the other thing I do is I like to make a vision board or I like to bring together like pieces of art or drawings or pictures or even real people. Like actors, put them on a visual board to look at before I start writing or while I'm writing to kind of ground me and remind me what the kind of vibe and visual of the world and story is.
Yeah, mood boards are a big thing in script writing and production design and stuff as well. They can be super helpful.
Yeah.
And now I know what I've been doing wrong all the time with the 25,000 words threshold.
You gotta push through.
Yeah, exactly. One other thing I did want to mention as well. I read this in a press release that I saw on Bookseller recently, and I thought this is if I'd read this about myself, I would have been absolutely blown away. This comes
Yeah.
from Rachel Denwood
Oh,
from
yeah.
Simon and Schuster, who said Catherine Doyle's Blood for Blood trilogy, because they just reacquired the rights, right,
Yeah.
to republish, is thriller romance gold. Over the years, well-versed YA fans have professed their love and admiration for these addictive mafia romances, and Simon and Schuster now poised to bring Vendetta, Inferno, and Mafioso to a whole new generation of readers. But this is the real one. The launch of the trilogy is a key pillar of our strategy to build Cat as a major YA author brand in the years to come. And that level of belief from a publisher that's one of the biggest publishers in the world must be fantastic to kind of hear.
Yeah, one of the high points of my career is meeting and connecting with Rachel Dunwood, who is an extraordinary and innovative and dynamic force in publishing, no question. She is extraordinary, and she's probably, and I think what's really special about her is when I sold Dagger and Flame, it was on the basis of a single mood board, and she and I sat down, we had a Zoom about it for an hour, and I had no material to give her, just vibes, and she got it, and we worked on it together from the start. So she's so integral, I think, to the success of this trilogy. And I would literally give her a kidney. She's extraordinary, and anytime she opens her mouth to speak about me, it's always overly generous. But I can say for she's making waves in the right way, and I'm just glad to be in the boat.
One of the things that we do at the end of each episode of State of the Arts is a little thing called Creator's Choice. And this is just a quick series of questions randomly picked by yourself, just to try and give us a sense of where your pop culture taste might be at the moment, or what's resounding for you artistically speaking. So we've got questions between 1 and 10. If you want to give me a random number,
I'm gonna go with 9.
then go at 9. Artists in your field whose work you most admire.
Oh my gosh. You know who I absolutely adore is the children's writer Catherine Rundell. She writes, among other books, Impossible Creatures, which is the Impossible Creatures series, which is doing extraordinarily well on both sides of the Atlantic right now, and sort of reintroduces creatures of mythology and stories, I think, of bravery and heart and good triumphing over evil. And I think if ever there was a time for a book like that to be doing very well across the globe, it's now. And she's an extraordinary person, an extraordinary children's writer.
And there was quite an extraordinary bidding war for the film rights to those books
That's
recently
right.
as well.
Disney are all in, and I can't wait to see what they do with it on the big screen.
Another number, please.
I will go with 7.
Last book you read that had a lasting impact on you, and why?
So, most recent book I read that made me cry like a baby, Wild Reverence by Rebecca Ross, which is sort of a story of a goddess who falls in love with a human in the midst of war. And it's just incredibly beautiful. And it looks at the meaning of life, the meaning of death, and kind of the finite time that we have on Earth. And it was just really, really moving. And yeah, it made me weep.
And last number.
1.
Best compliment your work has ever received.
Best compliment my work. Oh, so a couple of weeks ago, I got an email from a dad of 3 little girls. I think he lives in Wicklow, and he said that they had been reading my books. They found one of my books, I think, in the library, and then had been going through the rest of my kids' books. And he said it had become a nightly ritual for their family, and that it has been filling their house with imagination and creativity and wonder, and that he was very grateful for that, and he wanted to let me know. And I think I smiled on my phone for a long, long time after that. It's such an extraordinary compliment, and, what a gift to be able to do that.
That is a fantastic compliment. I might be putting that on some posters somewhere in terms of promoting some upcoming books. Kat, it's been an absolute delight to have a chat with you today. Thank you so much again for the time, and the best of luck with the books that are coming out next year. I will look forward to reading them. I think I'm going to try and read everything at this point in time, even though I'm not the target audience. I'm enjoying them, so I'm going to read
Thank you,
everything.
Des, that's really sweet. Thank you for having me. It's been a lovely chat. Really, really fun.
Take care.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to State of the Arts. We hope you enjoyed your time with us and that you can join us again in 2 weeks for a new episode. Until then, please remember that art matters.